Honey.
About 100,000 tags on Instagram later, here we are. Hey guys, it's Julia, welcome back to my channel. So today, it is the moment that we've been waiting like a good half a year for. Since Colourpop started releasing their monochromatic palettes, they waited, of course, until the very last one to come out with the yellow palette. So today, I am super excited to be reviewing the new Colourpop Honey Pressed Powder Eyeshadow Palette. She's so beautiful. The name of the palette itself is, of course, a reference to Bound 2, which gave us the iconic
Honey.
I don't own all the Colourpop monochromatic palettes, mostly just because not all of them really attracted me. The ones I own are the It's My Pleasure, which is the purple, the Just My Luck, and Honey. So I've got purple, green, yellow. I do love these very much. So this palette I had very, very high expectations for when I first ordered it. I think a lot of people did just because it was such a hyped up release that when it finally dropped, some people had mixed feelings. A lot of people were not a huge fan of the color scheme. I personally am very glad that they did actually stick to doing a monochromatic palette. I was really worried that Colourpop was going to cop out and do like 2 yellow shades and then call that a yellow palette, which
that is not correct.
In here we have 9 shades of varying degrees of yellowness. I will do like a full shade by shade breakdown later on and talk more about the color scheme. So if you want to see if this lived up to my impossibly high standards, keep watching this video and I will break it down. So my first step in every eyeshadow palette review is just to kind of break down the color scheme and see what the brand was going for. So first of all, there are 9 shades in here, and yellow was probably the monochromatic palette that I was most excited about, but also most nervous for, just because I feel like there's not a ton of things you can do. There's not a ton of ways to reinvent the yellow palette. So for example, the Just My Luck palette, which is their green monochromatic palette, even though it is completely green, I feel like there's a bunch of different types of green that they really did in here. The olive greens, you have this like beautiful lime green, you have deep forest greens, you've got some minty greens. There's just a bunch of different ways you can take it, and for that reason I feel like with this palette you can create a bunch of different distinct looks that don't look the same. So when this yellow palette came, my kind of first thought was that's going to be a more difficult palette to work with in that you can't really create a ton of different looks within this palette. I've tried to refrain from watching other people's reviews just because I don't want it to like taint the way I look at the palette. So as of now, I've only watched Robbie Christie and I Love Sadahi's reviews. They both did really beautiful eye looks with the palette, but I do feel like a lot of the eye looks I've seen with this palette have been pretty similar or looking almost the same. So I tried to get as unique as possible with the eye look I was showing you guys in today's video, but I don't know, I felt like it did end up kind of looking similar to Robbie D. Christie's at the very end of it. I feel vaguely the same with the Naked Heat. I feel like a lot of the looks I've created with this palette look almost the exact same, just because it is a very monochromatic one-note palette. It doesn't mean I don't love it, and I do love the color scheme in here. I just feel like I reach for this one when I know what specific look I want, because it's always going to look somewhat the same. So for me, this isn't necessarily a palette I'd reach into if I was like, I want to do something creative today and come up with something new. I'd reach into this if I either wanted some really good yellow shades or if I knew I wanted to do a fully yellow look. So now I will show you guys swatches of the entire palette. As always with my swatches, I do them on a dry arm. I'll do like a 1 or 2 swipe into the mattes and then right onto the arm, and then with shimmers, it's 1 swipe, no digging. You'll see, it's swatches. Shade by shade breakdown time. This is probably my favorite part just because I like talking endlessly and annoyingly about single eyeshadows. In this palette there are 5 mattes, 3 shimmers, and then 1 pure glitter shade. I will start off with the matte shades. So Stinger up here in the upper left hand corner is a really nice kind of like paler mustard yellow. This one wasn't the most like completely bright and like shock of yellow, but I really like this one for just building a little bit of warmth in the crease. I feel like it's very consistent with Colourpop's normal formula of matte shadows, and in general I feel like the monochromatic palettes are usually almost like better than Colourpop's normal formula of shadows. I did an entire video about how yellow eyeshadows are famously very hard to formulate, picking out my favorite ones, and I've really never liked Colourpop's matte yellows. This was very impressive to me because these were all very nice and pigmented. They showed up really well in the eyes. They weren't super chalky or super hard to blend. So Stinger for me is probably the most like neutral of the yellows. I feel like it really just creates this nice warmth in the crease, but it doesn't add too much like, whoa, that is yellow. Whereas Sweet Spot, which is what I'm wearing in my crease right now, I feel like this is probably the most like high impact, bright, wow, crazy shade in the palette. The first couple times I used this one, I was like, how is yellow showing that bright on my eyes? Because normally when I go in with yellows that are this bright normally have a very like stark white base to them. So they can be very hard to build up without looking chalky or looking too like powdery on the eyes. This one I felt like did a really nice job of looking very bright on first application and not needing a ton of building up, which I appreciated. Besides that, it's not the most unique shade. It's just basically a true primary matte yellow, very classic shade, and I think it was definitely necessary in this palette. In the bottom left hand corner, Totally Buggin' is this kind of like orangey mustard yellow matte shade. It kind of reminds me of the shade New Wave from the Anastasia Subculture palette in that it kind of pulls, it's more to the orange side if you pair it with like deeper shades, but it really does pull yellow on the eyes if you pair it with the other brighter yellows. So another kind of more neutral palette, if you want to do a more like muted yellow eye look, you can totally use Stinger and Totally Buggin' as your mattes. Definitely my favorite matte in the palette is Oh Behave right here. It's
Mustard yellow.
Country boy, I love you. It shows up really, really nicely on the eyes. I feel like it's just a little bit easier to work with than Sweet Spot because Sweet Spot's just a tiny bit brighter, but this one shows up a little bit more pigmented and more yellow on the eyes. They do look pretty different in the pans, but on the eyes they do kind of look very similar, so I would have wished for this one to just be a little bit more on the like mustardy side, but I do really enjoy the shade, so yeah. And then finally, the most like puzzling shade to me in this palette was Buzzkill. Because when I saw the promo pictures for this palette, I was like, oh, it's a brown.
No.
It really does look like just like basic pukey matte brown, which I love a good basic pukey matte brown. Don't disrespect my pukey matte browns. However, I didn't want a brown to be in this palette, and I was like, oh, ugh. But interestingly enough, this one does not look brown on the eyes. It actually blends in, so I have this on the outer corner, and it really just turns into this kind of like dimensional mustard yellow shade. It's the perfect shade for adding just a little bit of like dimension to the outer corner of the eye look without turning it into like a neutral brown look, if that makes sense. That was another concern I had with the yellow palette. I was like, how are they gonna make it like have a nice range of shades? I want light shades, medium shades, and dark shades. So I would say that in here there's kind of like light shades and medium shades, but I was really impressed that they were able to kind of create dimension within the palette without adding in like a matte brown. So this shade surprised me, but it was not a buzzkill.
I'm so funny.
No. Onto the shimmers. Probably my favorite shade in the palette is Sunburst. I'm wearing this on my eyes right now on a lid. It's really interesting. It's a pale yellow shade, but it has a very nice duochrome flip, so it kind of flips between like bluish, a little bit of greenish in there. It's just such a fun like dimensional shade, and I think it really adds a bit of pop to the eye look. So I give this one brownie points for just being a little bit more unconventional, but I think it looks really beautiful on the eyes. Dandy is probably my least favorite shimmer in the palette just because I feel like it's not really yellow. It's basically just a gold shimmer shade, and I was really hoping that they would do like yellow shimmers but not gold. To me, there's a huge difference between like a yellow shimmer and a gold, and I think this is gold. Definitely is a more yellow gold, but it's still gold. And I'm so sorry, that ramble probably made no sense at all, but it performs fine. It performs like any other standard Colourpop shimmer. Then finally, Queen Bee over here. This was a little bit puzzling to me because I was like, why did they put a bronze shade in the palette? It's actually very close to the shade Buzzkill on the eyes. It looks like a nice mustard yellow deep shimmer, and I've never really seen that kind of shade before, so I think it really does depend on what you pair it with. I feel like if you did pop the shade on with like a brown eye look, it would look like a basic bronze, but because it's paired with a bunch of yellows, it really does pull more to the yellow side, and it just really fits with the rest of the color scheme. So I was very impressed. I wasn't really sure I was gonna like this shade in here, but it works out. And then Palooza. I've had very mixed feelings in the past about putting glitters inside pressed powder palettes. I feel like pressed glitters normally just don't really work that well. So when I saw that this palette had a pressed glitter, it wasn't a deal breaker for me. I was just kind of like, that was probably put in there to make it look really pretty. So like aesthetically, this palette photographs really well because glitter just like looks so nice in pictures. It really adds to like the eye appeal of the palette, but in terms of usability, I was like, that's not going to be the most convenient. I love the color of this one. It's a true yellow glitter, and I think that's beautiful. It's very hard to find that kind of color for glitters. It's a glitter. It's a high maintenance shade, and also it says on the back that Palooza is not intended for use in the immediate eye area. So that is kind of weird. Normally, I don't really take that kind of warning super seriously. It basically just means try and avoid getting it into your eye because this type of glitter is not specifically like cut and formulated for eye use. I do live life on the wild side, and I've been known to put non-eye safe glitters onto my eyes, but it's really up to your own discretion if you want to do that. I've never had any trouble with doing that, but I do think it's kind of weird that Colourpop would do that with such like a hyped up palette that's been waited for so long. Those are just my reservations. I do think it's a beautiful shade and it did perform really well in this eye look. So I love it personally just because I like working with glitter every now and then, but I don't think everyone's gonna get along with this shade, and I think it was really put in this palette just to make it look more aesthetically pleasing and not necessarily for the actual fact of like, hey, let's put a glitter in there, you know? But now I will show you guys how I created this eye look so you can see how the shadows perform in action. Alright, so starting off, I already did one eye off camera, as per usual, because I am neurotic. And on this eye, I've already primed with the Anastasia Beverly Hills eyelid primer, and I'm going to go ahead and start playing with the eyeshadows. Start off, I'm going to grab the bright yellow matte shade up here called Sweet Spot and just dust that into my crease. So far, in the 3 times I've played with this palette, I've really noticed that these shadows, especially the mattes, definitely do perform best on a wet base. This is the first time I've used it with the ABH eye primer. Before I used it with the Colourpop No Filter Concealer. In both ways it worked pretty well. I would say that the eye primer is a little bit better, but honestly any like tacky wet base will really do best to help these eyeshadows like get the most pigmentation and cling down better. Alright, so that is Sweet Spot all blended out on the eyes. This is the shade I'd normally be most nervous about just because it's like a pure canary yellow, but it actually showed up very well in the eyes. It's pretty pigmented. I would say it's a little bit chalky, but there's not too much kickback in the pan. Just to blend out the edges, I'm going to go into the shade here called Stinger. It's this kind of like pale baby like mustard yellow, and I'm just going to dust that along the outer edge of where I placed Sweet Spot. So that is the crease. I'm going to go into the shade down here called Buzzkill. Technically it's the darkest shade in the palette, but it's really just like a mid-toned kind of pukey yellowish brown. Even though it does look pretty brown in the pan, it shows up very yellow on the eyes. So you'll see here. I feel like on top of the other matte yellows, it really does pull a lot more like dark yellow, which is good. I like that it kind of keeps up the unity of the entire color scheme, and it's not just like some brown thrown into the palette randomly. I actually really like how that looks. One of my main concerns with this palette was just like not being able to create enough depth in the eye with these colors just because they're all pretty like light to mid-toned, but this actually, I like how that like little bit of darker mustard yellow brings a little bit of depth to the eyes. Alright, so I just gave myself a nice half cut crease, not taking that concealer all the way out there. Now I'm going to go into my probably favorite shade of the palette, which is Sunburst. It's this very pale yellow duochrome. It has a little bit of like a green blue shift in there. It's so pretty. And just with my finger, because I'm kind of lazy right now, I'm going to take the shade here called Queen Bee, which is kind of this like golden yellow bronze shade. Take that very sparingly and then just pat that onto the outer corner to merge the shimmer and the matte together. You could definitely just like stop here and it would be a really good eye look, but I want to add a little bit of this glitter on here called Palooza. Technically this glitter is not eye safe, which means it's not really meant for immediate use around the eye area. So with these types of glitters, I do still like putting them on my eyes technically, but I avoid putting them like close to my lower lash line or to my inner corner. I really just try to focus them in the crease or on like the upper part of the eye. So I'm going to start with a little bit of glitter glue. I know Colourpop says that you don't necessarily have to use glitter glue with their glitters, but I still do. And I'm just running this glitter glue along the top of the cut crease. Now grabbing some of the shade Palooza, I'm just patting this along the cut crease. I'm keeping the glitter line a little bit thicker in the front of the eye, and then I'm just kind of tapering it out naturally towards the end, just to kind of create this like nice faded glitter effect. That is it for the upper part of the eye. I'm noticing a little bit of glitter fallout on my lower lash lines, which doesn't normally happen to me when I use like pressed glitters like this, so that's kind of annoying. I'm gonna grab the other like matte bright yellow shade in here. This one's a little bit more on the like mustardy side, whereas this one is like true sunshine yellow. So I'm grabbing Oh Behave right here. And see down here, I think you can really see the difference between how these shadows perform on wet versus dry bases. Because on the upper part of my eye, everything was on a wet base, whereas down here I did set my concealer with loose powder, so everything is a little bit more muted, not as easy to build up. You can still build it up to nice color payoff, as you can see, but it's just a little bit harder to get there. And then with my finger, the final touch, I'm gonna grab the shade here called Dandy. I really thought that said daddy for a second. Okay. And what I really like doing is I kind of draw a line from where my pupil is down to where the lower lash line is, and just pat a tiny amount of shimmer right there in the middle, and then I just kind of go ahead and blend that in. I think it's a really fun technique for kind of opening up the eye a little bit more and just making everything look wider. And then to finish it off, I'm just going to pop on a tiny bit of inner corner highlighter. Alright, I popped on the House of Lashes Iconics and finished up the rest of my face, and this is the completed eye look. I really, really like it. Wow. Wow.
Uh-huh, honey.
Normally with other palette reviews, I try and do like 3 or 4 eye looks in advance so I can show you guys them in the video. With this palette though, because they didn't really do PR, I did want to get this review up as soon as possible. So this is not a first impression of the palette. I have used this one before, but the way I've tested this palette out is using it at night and just like doing an eye look, testing it out, and then washing it straight off. So I don't have any other like photographed eye looks to show you guys, but I will be posting eye looks with this palette throughout the week on my Instagram. So if you got this palette and you want some like eye look inspiration, go ahead and check out there if you want to, or not. I don't care. I'm not your mom. Now I want to rank the Honey palette with my other Colourpop monochromatic palettes and just say where it stands in my collection. So in terms of these palettes, I would still say that It's My Pleasure is my favorite, just because I'm really into the shimmer shades in here. I feel like there's a really good shade selection, and the mattes that they formulated were really, really good. I would say that the yellow palette for me is in second place, just because I was really impressed with the selection of mattes in here and how everything performed. I was simultaneously expecting a ton from this palette, but also scared that it wasn't going to be good. So I expected like everything, but also nothing. Just because I've tried Colourpop's yellows before, and I've never liked any of their yellow shadows. So the fact that this was so good to me, I was like, wow. They stepped up.
Step the fuck up, Kyle!
So I do think that this is aggressively, intensely, 100% worth a lot of the hype that it's been getting. That's not to say that there aren't any flaws, and for the past like 35 minutes of filming, I've been like pointing out every single flaw I've found with this palette, but I do think it's a really good, solid yellow palette, and really couldn't have asked for a lot more. And then in third place for me is the Just My Luck palette. I do love this a lot. This ranking kind of means nothing because I love all 3 of these palettes. So overall, my final thoughts. First of all, I can't believe this is $12. Colourpop how? Really high expectations for this palette, and thankfully it did pay off. I really, really enjoyed working with this one. Even though it is yellow and you are inherently kind of limited in what you can really do with the color yellow, I think that they did step out of the box. They did some really fun things like this duochrome here. There's a nice range of different shades in here, and overall I just really like it. So if you've tried Colourpop's yellows in the past and you were like, oh god, this is butt shit, I think you should try this one out, because I am probably the most picky person when it comes to yellow shadows, and this was very good. Also, if you decide to not get this palette because you thought this was a matte brown, you might want to try it out too. So the Colourpop Honey Pressed Powder Palette is me approved. Hi, how are ya? Gross. I really need Colourpop to come out with an amalgamation of all their monochromatic palettes and just make one 9-pan Brights palette. Is that so hard? Just imagine like a 9-pan palette like this, same kind of package except it's rainbow on the outside, and then you've got a red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, pink, something else here.
I am so powerful. My mind, oh.
Can we get that? Until Colourpop comes out with a Sprites palette, I will be threatening to sue through Twitter. But in the meantime, this palette has kind of filled a hole in my heart that I didn't really know was there, but if I could remake my best of yellow eyeshadows, this would definitely be in there. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say. I really hope I did not leave anything out of this palette review, but if you like this one, please give it a thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed down below, and also follow me on Instagram to see makeup looks like this and other looks I post with this one coming soon. You are gonna see a flood of yellow eyeshadow looks because I am pre-filming and like pre-shooting a bunch of makeup looks, because as of now I'm exactly 2 weeks out from surgeries. Yeah, if you want to see this face, go ahead and follow me there, and if you made it to the very end of this video, you effervescent honeybee, I love you so much. You get the bonus meme. Goodbye.
Wow.